Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Hey, welcome back to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name's AJ Matthew, and with me, as always, is my buddy Scott Ball. Hey, Scott.
Hey, AJ, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, and we are on episode 63 this week, and I think this is a great topic and a timely one, future-proof church metrics, and we're going to be talking about 3 principles that you can employ in your church that will allow your measurement to be dynamic as the world continues to change, but we are looking to the future from today to the future, or maybe we could say from March 2020 to the future and not at the past. So I think there's a better philosophy and better systems that we can use to measure what's happening in our churches without looking at, historic attendance data as we used to, or comparing the past even to the present. What are you thinking?
I'm trying to think of an analogy, and we didn't talk about this before we started recording here, so let's see how this one tracks. It would be a little bit like, back in the day, AJ, people used to ride trains places. I mean, when I'm saying the day, I mean in like 19th century, early 20th century, people are riding trains to get places. But since the dawn of the airplane, when you're talking about mass travel or travel of long distances, people are taking planes, right? So what churches are struggling with a little bit, I think, it's a little bit like trying to use passenger train metrics to measure how effective domestic travel is, right? You go, well, hold on. Domestic travel can still happen, is still happening, but it's happening in a new way. And to measure domestic train travel as the standard is to pick a standard that's not one that's consistent with where things are going. I know that's a very odd analogy, but are you tracking with what I'm saying?
I think so.
It's an antiquated thing to measure.
Okay. All right. There you go.
It's an antiquated thing to
you just
measure.
come out and say so, Scott?
You wouldn't say, well, oh man. And so similarly, churches are kind of going, wow, our churches are really struggling and they're declining and we're not making disciples. But if you're measuring things that are not reliable standards for metrics in a post-pandemic situation, you might be missing opportunities and definitely missing opportunities and you may even be deceiving yourself to some degree on whether or not discipleship is happening. So domestic travel is happening, but if you're measuring train traffic and not air traffic, you're missing the opportunity for growth. That's the analogy. And again, not sure that that's abundantly clear.
Let me also slip in. You just said the term post-pandemic. We're talking post the beginning of the pandemic of 2020. Not that it's over. Don't send emails.
Oh, my goodness. The number of comments we get. Can't believe you guys are saying, what post-pandemic? It's not it's post-beginning of the pandemic. Thank you so much for the clarification, AJ. Put your emails away, everybody.
Let's jump into principle number 1, and that is that we've got to deal in reality. So I hope you've got a lot of historical data on your church, years of attendance and giving and all that stuff. And it was highly valuable. I hope you used it effectively in years past.
Yep.
It's not relevant to today. Just got to say that. We're living in a different time. Not that maybe 5 years from now, we won't go, hey, that might be, some onboarding with the Malfers group. Hey, give us 5 years of attendance data so we can look at trends. Maybe those will be effective trends.
Yeah.
Since March 2020, they're not relevant today.
And maybe not, to be honest. When you go, maybe not. Maybe it's still, I mean, I don't know. There's been such a seismic shift. I just don't think you can underestimate how much things have shifted in the last year. And I've gone back on this, forth on this a little bit, AJ. And I know that you have too, trying to really debate how much of this is permanent, how
Yeah.
much of this is temporary.
Mm-hmm.
The longer this goes on, the more permanent these shifts are. And we're coming up on a year. And people's habits are starting to be, at this point, they're fully reinforced. So I think that we're past the point where we can say it's mostly temporary. It's not mostly temporary. If I was to put it on a scale, I'd say most of these shifts are mostly permanent. And another reason why I feel that way is some of these shifts and trends, AJ, started before COVID. And so COVID accelerated the change. It didn't manufacture the change.
True, yeah. But, temporary or permanent is still relative.
Sure.
Temporary for what we see now because things might be different, not like the old, but different from today.
So that's definitely true. Yeah, that's a great
Or
point. Yeah.
same as today, different from old, same as today 4 or 5 years from now.
Right.
You don't know. And the point of this episode is that it doesn't really matter because we're
Doesn't
talking
really
about setting you up so that regardless of what's happening, you'll
Right.
be able to measure, you'll have better metrics that can change as the world changes. And
That's
you can
right.
keep measuring what's important. So
Yeah. So principle number one, then, it deals in reality as in what is, not what was. You you can't base your goals around what things were pre-COVID.
yeah.
I still hear that so much in talking with churches. I've worked with churches all across the U.S. since this started, and all of them are still trying to base their strategy around what was pre-COVID
Mm-hmm.
and not around what is right now. And you can't do that. You have to deal in reality. You have to deal. This is what it is. Again, it's not. There is no moment in time where fingers will be snapped. I mean, and I know that that's so hard because it feels like that's what happened in March. I mean, it was March 14th, 15th, right around there, mid-March. It was like someone Thanos snapped his fingers, and things seismically changed. But the return or what comes forward isn't going to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to make your plans not based on what was, but what is right now.
Yeah.
And this is the mistake that we hear, which is a good segue, I think, into principle number two.
I agree. Principle number 2 is in developing future-proof metrics that they push you from where you are to where you want to be. They're future-focused, and this is going to be one of the biggest philosophical or thought shifts in the church because, Scott, as you know, both of us talk with a lot of pastors, and it happens in the first 30 seconds probably of any conversation, whether we ask or not.
Right.
Will be a comparison. Yeah, we're running, 70. We used to be running 120 on Sunday. We used to be. Hear it constantly.
All the time. It's the very first thing out of people's mouths. Was it, how's your church doing? Well, before March, before COVID, we were this. And everything relative to the past. We're running 50% of what we were pre-COVID. We're running 60% of what we were pre-COVID. And
BC, before COVID.
Yeah. I understand that. I do. Because there's a sense of mourning and loss there, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter what you were pre-COVID and in terms of setting goals.
Mm-hmm.
Your basis has to be where we are. That's principle number 1. And then focus on the future. And so this may just sound like semantics, and maybe to some degree it is, but talking about goals in the frame of recapturing the past versus driving towards the future, it does matter. If you're just trying to chase the past, it really is difficult. It'll also prevent you from seeing new people If your focus is on the past, you might be trying to recapture engagement with someone who has left your church for whatever reason over the course of the pandemic. And you don't know if they may come back, they may not come back. Anybody
Yeah.
who tells you that they know is lying to you. They don't know. No one knows. I don't know. AJ and I before we started recording, there is a question. How springy is this, right? Like, how much wiggle is this? If you've lost 40% of your pre-COVID attendance, what percentage of those folks are going to just immediately bounce back as soon as there's a vaccine or something like that? We don't know. And anybody who tells you they know is lying. Everybody's just guessing. And so you can't plan or develop goals around things that you can't know. Here's what you can know. You can know what you have right now and what the situation is right now. And here's what you can know. You have a mission to make immature disciples. And so plan for the future. Some of that growth may come from people who previously were engaged with your church, but a lot of that growth might come from people who haven't been connected to any church or weren't connected to your church in the past. And so think forward, not trying to recapture the past. So I would encourage you to just eliminate from your vocabulary the whole language of, well, we're at 70% of pre-COVID, we're at 60%. It's just, what does that help?
This is a mind shift. And this is where, so people might go, okay, yeah, well, our future focused goal is getting back to pre-COVID. No, you can't cheat the system. You cannot cheat the system.
Right.
That's not allowed in our philosophical principles that we're laying out for you today. You've got to start from today, and as we unpack this, have meaningful measures. Go from today into future goals, but not compared to the days of old.
I'm much more interested in what has happened to you since March.
Yeah.
So if you've, you regathered in June or in August or whenever it was, and since then, what's been going on? And that's way more informative about your strategy right now than what you are now relative to a year ago or 2 years ago. What has happened since you regathered?
Yeah.
That's important information.
I don't want to gloss over, something that you just mentioned a minute ago, and that's a time of mourning. And if you're still mourning, you need to stop, because you've spent enough time on that. If you haven't really mourned, then start today and set an end time for that. I mean, we're, as of today, our date of recording is November 10th, 2020. I don't know when you're listening to this. So if you should be well done mourning by the end of the year, that's too long if you're starting today. Give yourself a month, give your staff a month, your people a month, and maybe even talk about this. But you've got to call an end to that and move forward. Because, well, God doesn't live in the past. God lives in the future, and he's calling you into something new and better and greater. And it does no good. There's a time to mourn, and there's a time to move on. And so take that to heart today. Think through that, whether you're still mourning or not 6 months later, 3 months later, or anywhere beyond a month. And let's get down to business, right?
Yep. Yeah. So principle number 1 is we got to deal with reality. We're dealing in reality. Number 2 is we're pushing forward from this reality, from where we are to where we want to be. And, to some degree, forget the past. Like, what has happened has happened. You can't do anything about that. So let's focus on, and yes, mourn it, but now it's over and we have to move forward. So this is a great opportunity then for principle number 3. I think this is a paradigm shift, another paradigm shift, that from how we were measuring in the past to how we can measure in the future. And by shifting our focus, AJ, in how we measure moving forward, it sets us up to be a little bit more flexible if something like this were to happen in the future.
Exactly. Yep.
So what is our third principle?
Our third principle is to measure progress in process, not only in attendance of programs.
Right.
So hang with us on this because we're going to walk through some examples also.
Uh-huh.
The key to true progress in your church is moving people through a process of maturity. And let's lay a couple of foundational elements here. Number one, the mission of your church is to make and mature disciples of Jesus Christ. And we do that through a strategy called a discipleship pathway, in which we have intentionally laid out a few simple steps for people to increase in maturity to the point of becoming disciple makers themselves, refilling then this funnel, if you will, back into the top of more people coming to faith. Okay. Mission is to make and mature disciples. Strategy is to have a discipleship pathway that is a process of maturity in the church. If we focus on the process, progress of people through the process, and not simply quantity of people in any one space or anything like that, where we will be more intentionally focused on outcomes or outputs than we are on simple, quantity measures.
That's right. And so this is so tough. And I know that this really, again, maybe comes down to semantics for some folks, but it is really how you look at it.
Yeah.
So you want to define, there's almost a bit of a separation, AJ, between what our goal is, what we would like to see, the outcome that we want to achieve versus what specifically are we going to measure. So our focus is on the outcome we want to achieve, and we hold that what it is that we're going to measure a little bit loosely, because we could always swap that out with something else, so long as our focus remains on the outcome that we're trying to achieve. And I think that this is the breakdown that we've had for churches for so long. So again, this is such a terrible, I should have thought harder about an example, a metaphor here, but I'm locked in now. I'm married. I'm married to it, and I'm moving forward. If the goal would be to increase domestic travel, okay, that would be the goal. We want to see more people traveling domestically.
Mm-hmm.
You could choose to measure how many people are riding trains. You could choose to measure how many people are riding planes. The ultimate goal is more people traveling, right? That's what it is that we want to see. If I got so hung up on domestic train travel, like let's just assume I'm some 1860s, railroad baron. I'm like sad and depressed because what I'm seeing is nothing but decline, no opportunity, no hope. And that's what's happened, AJ, is that people have become so locked in on their programs and not the ultimate outcome that we're trying to achieve, that they're just focusing on those program numbers, seeing the decline and missing the fact that we can still see growth if we would simply choose to realign our metrics. Is this making any sense at all?
Yeah, and you have to
we have hyper focused on the means by which to achieve the outcome versus the outcome itself.
Yeah. And then you still have to dig in also and not get locked into some following quantitative metric of, okay, last month, 20,000 people traveled domestically. And then a month from now, you're like, okay, 21,000 traveled domestically, not knowing what drove that, or, how in the process of getting people to travel more, where are we losing? Could we have increased by, 15% more if
that's right,
this part was better? So
that is such a great point. So functionally speaking, we still have to choose to measure something. So we might shift to, well, we're going to primarily, we're going to focus on bookings or some, whatever. We're going to pick, you still have to pick something to measure, and there will always be flaws in the thing that you're choosing to measure. It's always going to be somewhat myopic. It's going to give you a slanted perspective on things. But having a mental cognitive recognition of the separation between the goal you're trying to achieve and the metric gives you a little bit of perspective then on understanding the strengths, weaknesses of that particular metric versus making the thing that you're measuring the end into itself. I hope that this is making sense
Let's
to you.
move into our examples to kind
Okay.
of and to continue unpacking this. So
Right.
we've got 4 examples for you that are aligning with a 4-step discipleship pathway in a church. Remember we said the strategy for making and maturing disciples of Jesus is a discipleship pathway. Inside of that, there's strategies for each component of that.
Yep.
And so our fictional church example here has a 4-step process. It has like a worship gathering connection step, and then it has like a relationship growth step, and then it has a serving step and an evangelism step.
Sort of a
And
very stock standard type approach. Yeah.
very, very standard. And of course the output, the effectiveness of the final step comes back around to the top, and because people are always increasing in faith, other people come to faith, and it continues on. So in our first example here, our process goal is connecting new people into worship.
Right.
Process is
Right.
connecting new people into worship. So what can we measure in that? We could increase the number, measure how many connect cards are increasing. So we're measuring the engagement of new people in the church, because we're not doing connect cards for everybody in the church. I mean, maybe your church takes like attendance. I went to a Methodist church when I was a kid, and every Sunday they would pass the attendance log, and my parents would fill out, we're here, there's 4 of us. Maybe you're still doing that. I don't know. But what's most important is, how many new people came into our church this week and are interested in making a connection to us so that we can take a step towards them. They can take a step towards us.
Right.
So again, the process goal is that new people are connecting in worship. And so we've got to figure out, how do we measure that? Well, this is just an example. One way would be in guest connect cards.
That's right. But our goal is not connect cards. Our goal is connecting people into worship. So there's a disconnect. So when we recognize, the goal of the process is to get more people connected to God in worship, not worship as the program, but get connected into worshiping Jesus. That's the goal. Then we can just choose something to measure that. And it's that bifurcation between the goal of the process versus the thing that we choose to measure gives you a little bit of perspective so you don't get too hung up. So when things have to shift or change programmatically or strategically, you can choose something new to measure while staying married to the goal of the process. And that is the thing that churches have struggled to do. They have so intertwined, AJ, their programs with the process that they can't see them as 2 different things.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, you might be listening to this and go, so again, such a terrible example, but if in your brain, the only way for domestic travel to happen is through trains, you've completely missed it. And so many churches, this is what they encountered, AJ. The second their church building had to close and all of their programs had to quit, they had no framework for thinking about discipleship as a process outside of the programs that they had going on day to day.
Yeah.
That's why this matters.
At the risk of making this more confusing than it needs to be, because some people might be going, well, that's a trailing metric in itself. Measure connect cards, and people are already there. You just measured that they were there. But remember, this is a cyclical thing. There's a cycle to this. And so you do need to keep in mind, guests coming to your worship service is likely a result of people in your church going out into the community. So the fact that they came and that you measured that they were there is likely the effect of step 4. And because measuring that they're there is not affecting that they're there. So, you still have got to have the rest of the process in place.
I mean, that's such a
right thing.
Yeah. Again, at risk of making this slightly complicated, it is still really valuable information, because I could have digital and in-person connection cards, and if I'm not getting any, that's really valid information for a couple of reasons. One, are we catching all of our guests? Maybe we have more guests than we than we know, because we're doing a really terrible job of getting people to fill out connect cards, so we're not actually connecting with people. Two, it could tell us that we're not having guests come, which is also really informative to tell us that we're not doing a very good job, on that fourth step. So
Yeah.
we've got to make some changes.
Well,
So yeah, I mean, yeah, it is a bit of a lag. You're right,
yeah.
but it's not an invaluable lag. It's
You
telling us
also
something.
you can't also forget about what the information you gather in the Connect card really, really matters because, if you don't know like what brought them there, where are they at spiritually? I mean, if you that would tell you a lot. I mean, if then 100% of your Connect cards said, oh, how'd you find out about us? Or, have you been engaged in a church? And they're all like, yeah, I used to go down the street and now I'm coming here. Have you gained anything? No, you've not gained anything.
Not from an evangelistic perspective or from a
Exactly.
process perspective. Yeah. You
From a
didn't gain a
mission
worshiper. They were
perspective.
worshiping. They just shifted where they were worshiping. Yeah.
So, yes, you can make some gains.
Y'all are smart. You're
That's
catching
still
this.
good. That's still
All
good.
right, let's
But
move on to the next
yeah.
step.
All right, number 2. Our second process goal is increasing relational discipleship. These are
Right.
examples.
So we're starting from a theological framework, right? We say there's no context of Christianity, zero, that is loner. Like you
Yeah.
don't there's no loner Christianity in the Bible, the whole Bible, especially in the New Testament. Really, again, Genesis to Revelation, no such thing as sort of just me or just me and Jesus, right?
Yeah.
We see it in page 2, right, of Scripture. It's not good for man to be alone. And so God Himself is not alone in a sense. So we need community. We need relational discipleship. So that's our process goal. It's a theological assertion that we need to increase relational discipleship. So
Yeah.
what could we measure that would show that?
We could measure an increase in our number of small groups.
Yeah.
Just an example. Okay.
Right.
Don't send emails. Just an example.
So typically, this is a converse from the past, right? So in the past, you might say, well, a certain percentage of average worship attendance is engaged in a group.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to measure that right now.
Right.
Average worship attendance. I mean, how do you factor in your online audience?
Online, right. Yep. Exactly. So yeah, there's a differentiation here between the number of people engaged in a small group and the number of small groups that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and we think it's a better measure for how many small groups do you have because it encompasses a lot of behind the scenes things that have to happen before that. If you're going to increase if you want to add one more small group, you need more than just people to attend it. You need a leader for it.
Yep.
You've got to have a system for developing a leader who would be qualified to lead it. There's a lot of other things that have got to build up to be able to launch another small group. Whether that new leader came out of an existing group or just, came on the scene from somewhere else or whatever it might be. So, I mean, yes, it's good to know how many people are engaged in groups, but how many groups are we ready to launch another group? Do we have a system for launching another group or 10 more groups or whatever, and how do we know when we're ready? So increasing number of small groups is our second process goal or
go back to episode 55. If you haven't listened to that one, great conversation. My thinking on this has really evolved in the last handful of months, influenced by Bo Patterson, who's a guide on our team, one of our newer guides, lots of experience in groups ministry. And he talks about the value of this, that new groups reach new people because they're better at it. Just like new churches tend to be better at reaching lost people because they have to. Same thing with new groups within your church. They're better at forming new relationships and connections than existing groups are. And so he says that launching new groups is a sign of church health because you're connecting with people who would have a really difficult time connecting into the existing groups that you have. So we think this is a good metric. Launching new groups like AJ just said, it's an evidence of the fact that you're recruiting and developing leaders, that you're creating new opportunities for connection to new people, all of these things. And so it's going to drive growth, relational discipleship growth in your church. Now, again, if all this, your small groups ministry falls apart, things aren't working, guess what? You can still set the goal of relational discipleship is happening and choose a new thing to measure, which is going to drive a different strategy. And that's going to be okay, because your theologically developed goal of increasing relational discipleship stands distinct from the thing that you choose to measure. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Maybe there's something new, maybe they'll be beyond the choices of Sunday school or small groups. Maybe you're going to innovate something new.
Yeah. Hey, but from March to June, you could have immediately switched to how many people do we have connected in a Zoom group? Right? You could have just pivoted. I mean, versus getting stuck on, woe is me, our groups can't meet, or well, let's just try to get Zoom set up for all of our existing groups. What if you had innovated and said, let's come up with 10 different kinds of groups that we can do online, as we weren't doing before. Mm-hmm. Let's just get people connected. That's the difference.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Our third process goal is activating disciples to use their gifts to build up the body. Okay. Yeah. Ephesians 4 ministry here. What can we measure? We could measure reducing our volunteer deficit. So are we in a position in which we do not have enough volunteers today? Quite possibly. Scott,
very likely.
You just talk with a church that is your church is having, not your church, but church you work with is having to scale back ministry because of a volunteer deficit.
Literally turning away kids every Sunday from children's ministry because they don't have enough volunteers. They've got 2 services, they're running 2 services, but they can only provide children's ministry in one of those services, and they're turning kids away at that service because they don't have the folks. And so again, this assumes some things. It assumes that you know how many volunteers you need to run your ministry effectively. Now, how many volunteers you need now? Not how many volunteers did you need back in 2019 or 2018 or January of 2020, but how many volunteers do you need right now for where you are right now? And then connecting people, not just filling these seats with random people, but getting the disciples who are in your church, who are participating in your church right now. Let me take a step back. I would make this claim. The number of volunteers or leaders that you need to run your church as it is right now exists in your church right now. Right? So if you are a church right now on average of 100 people, I don't care what you were 2 years ago. Right now you have 100 people show up. Out of that 100 people, you have enough potential volunteers to run the church that you are right now.
Yeah.
Again, divorce from your brain what was. We were 300 and we needed 100 volunteers. Well, you're 100 now, so you don't need 100 volunteers. Right?
Yeah.
You're 100 now and you need 40 volunteers or 35 volunteers, whatever it is. So that's another problem that I think that churches are having, is goes back to they're not dealing in reality. Like, how many volunteers do you need for where you are right now? And that's going to scale up. I understand that. But if you were to reduce your volunteer deficit and go, okay, we realistically right now, we need 35 volunteers. We have 25.
Yeah.
So let's narrow that gap. That's what you'd want to see.
Yeah. Let me also point out that you should always be chasing a deficit here. You should never reach the end of this. That would, if your foot is currently a size 8, don't set your volunteer goal to size 8. Your foot's going to grow to an 8.5 and to a 9. Be a half a step up on your shoe size. Otherwise, you're going to grow, to the size of your shoe and
Right.
that's it. Like some fish, depending on what size fish tank they're in, they stop growing.
Sure.
Your volunteer need should always be one half size, one whole size ahead of what it needs to be today.
I
So
mean, that's how they make bonsai trees, right? You plant that tree.
I don't know. I'm not gonna just blindly say yes, Scott. That's how they make bonsai. I have no idea. Don't they
I mean,
cut
that's a
them?
whole
Don't they
concept of a
prune them?
bonsai tree, right? They keep it in a small enough pot.
Oh, is that it? It's pot bound? I
It's
thought they
pot
just
bound.
cut it, kept clipping it.
Or maybe a little bit of both, right? But it's constrained by the
Let's not
size
get
of the.
into things that we're not experts
That's
in.
true. We're not horticulturists. Someone will tell us if we're completely wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that that's one of the elements of bonsai tree. But yeah, I mean, if you're ever fully staffed, that means you're not growing.
Yeah,
Is what you're saying.
that's right. Exactly. Thank you
Yeah.
for speaking more clearly
No problem.
than me. Even if bonsai
It's usually the other way around, so I'll take it.
All right, our fourth process goal is disciples sharing their faith outside the walls of the church.
Again, theology-based goal here. We're just making a theological assertion that disciples make disciples.
Yes. So, what can we measure, Scott?
Increase personal evangelism. So if you're a Baptist church and listening to this, you're probably familiar with NAM's big Who's Your One campaign, right? Love this, actually. I think it's great. But how many of your churches right now, you're asking that question from the pulpit? Who's your one?
Mm-hmm.
That's an easy question to ignore. No offense, but it's really easy to ignore from the pulpit or from an online service. I can just go, yeah, that's a good question. Who's my one?
Yeah.
Versus someone sitting across from me and saying, "Hey, Scott, who's your one? What's their name?" And if I either maybe don't have a response to that, or I do, and then they can ask me, "Well, how's that going?" I can actually have an interaction with that. So there's something assumed here, which would be like a leadership development process, a leadership pipeline design situation where you're pairing up leaders with higher level leaders, staff with coaches with leaders, and once a quarter or so, meeting with those folks and being able to just add to your list of coaching questions, who's your one, and you can report that back up. So as you can submit, hey, I met with the people that my direct reports this quarter, and you shouldn't have more than 8, by the way. Out of my 8 direct reports, 6 of them were able to, they were able to give me a name, and 2 weren't. You might say you set a goal for 80% or 90% of your direct reports can identify who their one is. That would be good. That's something that's measurable. Again, you could pick something else, but have a commitment to the process and understand that what you measure will influence your strategy, right? But it can change. And that's why we titled this 3 principles for developing dynamic measures.
Right.
Is that we're not married to the things that we're measuring. We're married to the process. And we can shift our strategy based on what we choose to measure. There's like this relationship between the things we choose to measure and what we choose to do.
Yeah, right. That's process versus programs.
Right. So we're committed to the process. We're not married to the programs. We change the things we measure. It's going to change the way that we work, and it's going to hopefully increase our effectiveness in the process.
Yeah.
So I know that this is maybe challenging for some folks. It's paradigm shifting, and maybe it seems like it's just semantics, but even if it is semantics, the words we use matter, AJ.
That's
and
right.
They shift our perspective on the world.
Yeah. Yeah. If you are thinking to yourself, well, I'm kind of doing this and this, and you're trying to shoehorn your existing programs into our described process, please pause and really think through these. Let me run back through our process goal examples that we have here to kind of just get again in your mind this 4 steps that we would be taking our church and our people through. The first one, process goal, was connecting new people into worship. New people connected into worship. That was our first process goal.
And ideally, people who are not connected anywhere.
That would be great.
Hard to control that one.
Yeah.
but ideally people who are not connected anywhere.
It's more in your control than you might think it is based on the language that you use, what you talk about, the goals that you set, how you talk to your people. Yeah, what you go after in your fourth step. Our second process goal is increasing relational discipleship. We're not saying you have to use small group ministry. We're not saying you have to use Sunday school or Zoom groups or whatever. We're just saying the second process goal is increasing relational discipleship. The third, this would be kind of a service engagement. The process goal is activating disciples to use their gifts to build up the body. Process oriented. And the fourth one, an evangelistic step, is disciples sharing their faith outside of the church. Okay. Your Sunday school teacher or your small group leader, your children's director, telling the kids about Jesus doesn't count here. That's great. Do that. Don't stop doing that. But we're talking about external evangelism to the church. That was our fourth goal. And so this lays out a very standard kind of 4-step discipleship pathway in the church. Take it to heart, compare it to what you're doing right now, and think about how the differences are.
I want to, as we wrap this up, I just want to push a little bit, AJ. I mean, I've been dealing with, churches are really, I think, engaging with this concept and thinking it through. And I know how hard it is. I know how hard it is for churches. There is such a desire, I think, to retcon kind of everything that we're doing and go, no, we were doing this. We were connecting people in worship and relational discipleship and this and that. But then when you really push, you recognize how little of that was actually happening, and how the marriage really was about the programs and not about the process. I can think of multiple instances just in the last couple of weeks, AJ, in standing there with churches with, a couple of guys who had been at their churches for decades, older guys, standing there doing the workshop, evaluating some of the things that they're doing, and almost this sense, AJ, of mourning and going, it dawning on them, man, we are doing a lot of good things or things that seem to be good, but they're not achieving these process goals.
Yeah.
And that's tough. Like, I don't want to minimize that sense of loss of going, how much time and energy and bulletin space and money have we invested in things that just aren't doing it? And it's almost feels like it's not this, but it feels like an admission of failure. To cut it, to cut something or to change something. It's almost admitting we wasted time and energy and effort. And you shouldn't feel that way.
No.
Because you should just be looking to the future and going,
that's
okay,
right.
From where we are right now, what do we want to do?
Yeah.
Who do we want to be?
Yeah. If you haven't finished mourning, if you haven't started mourning, get it done. Get it done and move on, because there's work to be done. And if you think in the present environment, you cannot have a process like this that would actually be effective and increase, you're wrong. And you need to cast that away. That's Satan putting words in your mind and holding you back. Because there's churches that are doing really well, maybe not compared to 2019, but we're not worried about that. There's churches that are doing well today compared to yesterday, today, and they're looking forward to what they're going to do tomorrow. And that can be you too. And we'd love to help you do that. A lot of what we talked about today kind of would work better after a leadership development process. We could help you with that. And the foundational principles that we're talking about, we cover in strategic envisioning, and we'd love to help your church go through that as well. Scott or myself would love to speak with you, and you can reach us at our website at malfersgroup.com and schedule a meeting, and we can talk about how we can help your church move from where you are today to where you want to be in the future. So please do that. We want to talk with you because you've got a lot of potential that may be untapped right now, and we can help you get there. So,
I want to put a bow as we end this. I want to put a bow on my bad metaphor. 2020.
Take it, man. Take it home.
In 2020, air travel has taken a hit. But people haven't stopped wanting to go places.
Yeah.
They're just getting in their car. So if I worked in the travel industry, which I don't, but if you could look at what's going on, if I just was looking at air travel as the measurement for success, I could take a woe is me approach and go, well, but I'd be missing all the opportunities of the people who are willing to drive 200 miles or less.
Yeah.
For a staycation, for a cabin in the mountains. Like I'd be missing the opportunities to scratch that travel itch in people. And if my goal is to just see people moving, traveling, I could still accomplish that goal, but it's just going to look different than it looked last year. And so I know it's not a perfect metaphor, but if I'm just married to measuring air travel, I'm going to miss the opportunity. So if you're only married to measuring the programs you've had in the past as a measurement for discipleship success, you're missing the opportunity to make disciples.
Yeah, there you go. If your church is Amtrak or American Airlines exclusively, you need to get out of that business and simply become travel-focused organization.
And if things bounce back, and then they bounce back, and that'll be a happy surprise.
Yeah.
Air travel's back, whatever. But you were never married to that. You cared about getting people to travel. Like if all the in-person stuff bounces back, that'll be a happy surprise.
Yep.
But if it doesn't, you can still make disciples. You can.
Yeah. Go for it. Hey, you've been listening to episode 63 of the Church Revitalization Podcast, and we're glad you did. We hope that you come back again next week for some new content from us. Scott and I will be bringing you something, again, that we hope will be maybe a new perspective, a new look at what's going on in the world and in your church, and how you can increase making and maturing disciples. You can check this out online at malphusgroup.com/63, where you can read today's article on this topic and have links to listen, share, and even watch on YouTube. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you again next week.